I do want to know.
Me too.
I was sitting here taking other notes, just thinking of like, something else there. And okay, here we are. Hello.
It's always. That's what Mondays are for, is
Yep.
catching up. All right. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Project Failure Files, a series for anyone who manages people, projects, or processes for a living. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I explore project topics from the perspective of what not to do. In each episode, we talk about some of the common pitfalls, that share personal stories and experiences, explore strategies and best practices to help you to be successful.
In this episode, we are talking about the failure to close the loop on projects, phases of project agreements, commitments, anything else you're working on.
I feel I need closure on this topic, Sharon. I think we should discuss our feelings and then move on with our lives.
It kind of does sound like a relationship thing.
We're breaking up, Sharon.
But think about this from a project standpoint. Without tying things up, having a handshake, signing a formal agreement, send an email even at the end to confirm that all the deliverables have been met and accepted. There's definitely wiggle room that can come back to bite you. Because, what is done, and is it actually done? And
right.
Did they say it's done?
It's another way that scope creep happens, because if there's no acknowledgement, like, hey, we finished that phase, then there's that wiggle room. Should we try to squeak something else in, like under that banner of that phase? And then here's this work that is out of scope, that's driving up, that's skewing the data. It's also an important aspect of the post-mortem, which I love. I love when organizations that I've worked for, I've always propose it. And some of them that I've worked with as a consultant are like, we don't really do that phase. Like, oh, so you never pause to review and to learn. Excellent. Good model. So no sarcasm here.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I've been in these post-project reviews trying to learn from successes and failures there, and not having a clear picture of what were the milestones, what were we trying to do there. There wasn't enough clarity. Everybody recognizes that this thing started this big and exploded out. And basically when somebody in the executive team says, enough, we're done here. But there wasn't clarity about what was completed and when it was completed. As consultants, like, we can't live like that. We go in and it's around the scope of work. It's like, what you're asking for is outside of the scope. We can do it with this flawless change management process, and we have to go scope that out of what that'll take, what the cost, what the time impact, the resources, all of the other things. It's a net new project. Yeah. And so closing gives closure.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. We always talk about having structure. We always talk about having a process.
Have something. Yeah.
And I mean, it's really funny because we were just talking about this before. I think when I was younger, I definitely was better. And it's like the older I get and the more I do this, sometimes I tend to, not be as formalized as maybe I did before. And I struggle, but because truthfully, people really do appreciate when you're organized, when you're thorough. It's one thing to say it's done. It's another thing to have something formal that will basically say yes. So then later on, if somebody comes back and says, is this really done? You can say yes. And here's the place that you signed off on that, you acknowledged that this was finished. The other piece to this is there's the acknowledging that it's done, getting sign off that it's done, so that they don't come back asking for more on that particular topic without a CR or without a conversation. But from a team perspective, and this is the one we're all guilty about, I think, I've had a few places that have been good about it. I've had a few teams that have been good about it. But there's also the idea of recognizing that you have gotten done with the project, you've accomplished something, your team has achieved something, and being able to kind of draw a line in the sand to move to the next project, because it's always like there's just always things to do. So I think it is helpful kind of to recognize that, to be able to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, again, I appreciate when I've worked with project managers that were that level of detail. The other thing that happens too, I mean, we're kind of getting down into the weeds of this. I'm sure we'll circle back around, but before we officially start this episode, but it's the other thing that's very telling is that when you send that email or sit in that meeting with the stakeholders or with your boss and say, here was the scope, here's what we delivered, we've now completed this, and move on. And if they're just like, well, but there's this, I was thinking this other stuff, it's like, well, yeah, and I've even had customers and some leaders at companies I worked with that were like, they're wary of signing off. I mean, I had some bad relationships and some bad corporate culture where I would require signatures on the delivery of those documents. And would document that, like, is this not your signature? Yeah.
Same. No, well, because they would be like, no, we didn't do that. And I'd be like, no, right here.
We've gotten to the point where I've not done that with signatures in a long time, 20 plus years. But now it's with emails, like, let me show you this. And I would even print out copies of it just in case somebody somehow, like, went in, not that anybody was ever done that, but go in and then find the discussion, the thread, and delete the whole thing. Anyway, go down some dark paths here.
Now with Copilot, I think that'd be hard to do.
It would be very difficult to do.
So, okay, let's get started with some definitions.
Yeah, so we're talking about project closure. I mean, I think we kind of gave away some of the details. It's having the, I think it's very easy if you're organized, if you go the scope of work, if each a stakeholder meeting, if you're meeting weekly or twice a month or monthly, and you're going through and said, again, here's the milestones of the project. Here's what we have completed. We are done. We've moved to this. Here's the next phase. And so by capturing that, and especially now, if it's digital, if it's in a Teams meeting, you're recording that, you've got the transcript, and you can have, okay, all the stakeholders in there. I said these milestones were completed. These are delivered. And, here's you asking other questions, never pushing back on the delivery of those items. And so I would always say, like, hey, if you are quiet, that means you agree.
Yeah.
If you have issues, raise your voice.
And so I'm going to bring this up because we don't talk a lot about different types of methodologies. I think we have it on our list to talk about it at some point, the difference in the methodologies.
On the list, yes.
But Agile uses the term ceremony. And I think this is a really important thing to bring up because they use the word ceremony on purpose. And I think it's really something that people don't think about is when things transition from one phase to another, when things, complete, when you're moving in from one project to another. We think about the idea of like when kids are in school and they go from grade to grade to grade, and we have ceremonies at certain points in their educational experience to essentially acknowledge and celebrate that they have accomplished something more than just they went to school every day, right? So we go to work every day, we do our jobs every day, we do the things we're supposed to do it every day. But I really love the idea of the word ceremony because there's this idea that once you do things like, well, we're just done and we're moving on to the next day. And I like the idea of celebrating and putting some accomplishment and finalization around the idea that, you're finished with a phase, a project, whatever it is, a certain amount of scope. And we're celebrating that in a ceremony so that we can then get on to the next thing.
Right. Well, there is it's like, look, my brain is wired a little bit different than most people. So I don't care about the ceremony as much as the completing things, the endorphin rush that comes from, the ding, done, or crossing off the checklist or whatever that is. That's why I have like the running the checklist with the squares that I mark off, double line through when they're completed.
Yeah, I love the ding on to do when you click the button and it goes ding. Yeah. It's like, right.
I turned the volume up to get ready for that. Yeah, I know. But no, but just to clarify though, I mean, we're not talking about, obviously you finish a phase, you finish a body of work, you want to acknowledge that and recognize, the work that went into that as well. And it's more important to some people than others. Just because it isn't important to me, what is important is go back and look at it from a structural, a process standpoint, like what worked, what didn't work, how can we improve, constantly look at how do we optimize this, how do we do more, faster, better, smarter, kind of all those different things. So we're not saying that having a celebration or even going through at the end of an entire project, doing a formal post-mortem around that and reviewing that, it doesn't mean that the project is over necessarily. It's just recognizing that work was completed. And and that also then helps segment off and fights against the scope creep.
Yeah. Well, and it also keeps you from feeling like your life is one big wasted day to day to day to day to day to day to day. I mean, because, we say what not to do. And if you think about everything from your relationship with the team, the relationship with the stakeholders, emotional and mental health. We talk a lot about this now, right? Emotional and mental health, and also knowledge transition, right? We think about all those different topics. If you're just kind of keep going and there's never really a stopping point, then how do you know when to draw that line in the sand to give everybody kind of some breathing room to bundle this up, wrap this up, be able to do something tangible with it as well?
Yeah. Well, I think the last point there on definition, I think having closure also, it's about protection of respecting people's the roles and the fact that we all are multitasking. We're assigned to multiple projects. We have different levels of ownership, different levels of responsibility across those things. And this going in and having that structure, being responsible, accountable for that, and then realizing like, hey, this is like, we're trying to close it out in the date, like, but we've not crossed the T's, dotted the I's. We've not finished these other tasks, and we can't say we've completed this until those things are done. So it drives accountability. It protects the team, the individuals that are, the work and their role in those things. So again, that scope, it's not just sucking up more of their time.
Would never call somebody back for more stuff. Come on.
I know it never happens, but it also just over time too, being able to go, if it's clearly defined from start to end, then that also protects the organization from doing rework, confusing of like, comparing it to other projects. I mean, I started thinking about this space in the late 90s around doing pattern recognition and developing solutions in the knowledge management and project management space, to track and say, how do we capture this knowledge so that we could reuse and make it more accessible? And so if you think of like dumping content into SharePoint, if everything just bled into each other, like then your search terms would never work. You'd be pulling back, everything. It's right. It's like having, everything that we're doing, do we jam it all into one document, or do we have separate documents for different projects, different things?
Oh, well, Christian.
If it was all just one giant canvas, it was all part of that. Like that's
like whiteboard.
Whiteboard. It could be endless.
Endless, limitless canvas.
When you think about it, so how do you think about it from a project and cultural standpoint of how this impacts an organization? Maybe share, like, what are some of the key differences between organizations that respected the ceremony, had that formal structure, and those that push back against that and just do your job?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked at a lot of project-based organizations, and I think, when you see a mature organization that really does kind of follow the project outline, have start and end points, wrap up things, you can always tell an organization that's at a higher maturity level because, like you said, they have a lessons learned or a retrospective or a post-mortem, whatever you want to call it. They basically use the knowledge that they've learned afterwards to be able to do better things. And what's really neat about that is, like you said, if you have that information, when you go to do maybe the same thing again or something similar again, you're going to get a lot of benefit out of that. Whereas I see organizations that are not as mature that maybe don't know where that line is. They don't have the boundary. They don't do the lessons learned. They tend to repeat the same mistakes over and over and over and over because, and maybe they have rotating seats and knowledge transfer isn't done properly. And so what ends up happening is you have the same people, or the same roles that tend to just kind of, they show up and they work and they just kind of do the same thing over and over and make the same mistakes over and over.
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, other things too. If you can't go and point to, I'm just thinking of like the onboarding process. If you can't go and point to the process and the structure, like I think we've mentioned this a couple of times. Like I started working with Sharon's company, doing some fractional roles, like a little over a year ago, I think, um, and so doing some things, but one of the first questions that I remember I asked is like, I want to better understand, like, what is your process when you go to a client? What's your process to structure? What are the key components, your documentation format, and you had all that stuff standardized.
Yep.
So for somebody coming in, like if you went and hired a new technical consultant, you come in and say, here's the output, here's the phases, here's the structure, here's the documents that we have for each of these. They have a much quicker a ramp up time, a grasp of, oh, okay, I understand the approach. And then here's where my expertise fits in. But here's my weekly status. Here's how we do time cards. Here's the deliverables, the milestones that we track against this. Here's the scope. If I ever have questions of what is this project, go back to the scope of work. So that's the single source of truth of this is what we committed to. This is what you're paying for. Here's where we are against those things. With organizations where they don't have that, I mean, it often is, it revolves around like a strong manager, and it could be running well because of good people.
Yep.
And then those good people leave.
Yep. Well, and they're at the mercy of the client, right? And I've seen this in organizations where, like you said, you maybe have good people leave, or you've got people who mean well, but then because there's no way to manage that, the clients just end up, and by client, it could be internal or external clients, but basically the stakeholders end up just having kind of full access to the team, and they just kind of keep asking for things and keep asking for things and keep asking for things, and there's no boundaries. And so what ends up happening is they kind of take advantage of them, and things kind of get run over, and then what results out of that is the people who are asking for things tend to get frustrated because there's no process to know when they're going to get it or who's going to help them with it. And the people who are delivering get frustrated because they're getting overrun by people asking them for things that they can't give. Many years ago in my career, I was brought in, and the scope of what I was brought in for is that exactly that. We had a team of developers who were directly connected to the client because something like this kind of happened, right? And so the client basically had direct access to all the developers, and they were just calling and saying, I want. But the problem is nobody was coordinating. And so they were making a feature, and then that would impact a different feature, and that would impact a different feature. And, they were literally just calling and asking for what they want. And then they would just dump everything else they were working on and go straight to prioritize this thing the client asked for. And it created a lot of resistance, a lot of frustration, a lot of problems on both sides. And by bringing in, consistency around this, and what are we going to do, and when is it going to be done, and how are we going to say that it's done, that brought, a little bit of order to the chaos.
I've shared this story before, and I know you've had very similar, conversations. So back in the early 2000s, I had experience where, again, it was just chaos going in, and it was that thing where you had line of business owners that were going directly to the PM team. I was as a consultant there, brought in to clean a lot of this mess up. And I got to the point where I said, here's a structure, here's the process. You are not authorized, talking to my PMs specifically, like you are not authorized to add anything more to your plate. When people ask you inevitably to do these other things that are out of scope, if you accept it and I find out, you will be in trouble. If they come to you, you push back and say, I can't do it. Go talk to Christian about it. And so I had these angry people coming to me, and then I would explain to them, lecture them on the chaos and go through, and here's what we're doing. But with all of that, and what I did this at this company. I did it when I was at Microsoft, and it worked successfully at both places. I did it at 2 companies later. Again, it's something that I found. I learned this lesson while at another startup that we went public based in downtown San Francisco. And somebody used it. I'm like, this is brilliant. It was painful because there was a standing mandatory meeting 5 days a week. And people hate that. And I actually had to come in earlier to be able to make that meeting because I had a very long commute. And so it was extra painful for me. But it started the day out right with everybody on that same page. We knew. So the stand-up meeting, I mean, I love the way that I did it at Microsoft. And my people at first, I think everybody hated it. But I had some people that had flex days, and I'm like, we're done with flex days until we get this fixed. So it's mandatory 5 days a week, stand-up meeting in the first thing in the morning, like 9 a.m. And I went out and I purchased internally funny money, purchased a whiteboard and went and hung it in a hallway where most of our internal clients would walk through our area off the elevators. And I put up on the board, I said, here's all the projects by priority, listed them all out. I had who was working on them from my team, and I had estimated delivery date for each of those things. I'll do it this way because with the screen. So project, the requester, the ETA. Anyway, high level, who's working on it in the ETA, and so I said, that's it. Every day we're going through and we're walking through what's happening on this one. The people would step up and all right, this is what's going on with it. Here's the impacts of this. What do you need help on? Is there anything I can do? And we just talk right there. The next one and move down the list. And so what happened was then people would come over and they would look at that list and they'd go to the PM they're working with on my team. It was like a shared services team. And be like, well, but I really need you to work on this and reprioritize this. So they're like, you got to go talk to Christian. And so I had a number that would come over and talk to me, and I'd walk over with them to the board. I'm like, and you'll remember me telling this story by this example, Sharon. I was like, is your project more important than this one? No, they agreed. That's by our VP, top priority. Is it more important than this one? No. Is it more important than this one? No.
Yep.
All right. Now, is it more important than this one? Yes. I said, but you're at the line where I don't have people to work on that. So when these are done, then the next one will move up the list. I said, can you give me more funding? Can you give me people that I can manage to go and do this? Can you give me more time to deliver the thing? No, no, and no. It's like, okay, well, says, well, I could just go out and do this myself. Like, that's your prerogative. But then our VP that we share will ask, why are you spending this money when Christian's team is providing this thing? So anyway, the point was, over time, my people felt confident in the process, and they knew that they could get their work done. They understood the scope. And every day that list might shuffle. Priorities change, needs change, other delays. All right, while we're waiting on that other piece, we can't move forward on this project. This other project moves up, or a new thing that comes in from a high level, and suddenly it's number 3 on the list. And then I would have these other directors and stuff would come around. It's like, wait a second. I was first in the queue for the next resource and I just got pushed down too. Like, yeah, let's go explain what just happened. They even started to trust the process because they knew we weren't just making changes. It was, we went in and were thoughtful on the process. We said, like, based on the prioritization, the delivery, like all the other factors, here's why it got moved. Ultimately, they agreed with all of that. And so we were very successful. Once it got up and running, then we moved it back into the digital format, all up in SharePoint, had the dashboard. We could have just the calls. We didn't have to be there physically. So life got back to normal, but we stuck with that process. There's a number of reasons why it worked, but the main thing is that we were consistent, that we communicated heavily on that process, on that structure. And we let people know when we did the celebration, we did the recognition of when it's done. And then it was, okay, now these resources are freed up instantly. Right. This is done. Yes, it's agreed, handoff accepted. There's some polishing up some final things, but
we on the next thing.
We're working on the next thing and it will roll up. And they could see it changing or not changing every day. New requests coming in, prioritization, process.
Well, and think about it this way too. I love that because then the people who are watching the board or they're watching the list, they know that when that's done, they are or are not going to get it done, but like they're not like going to be commingled into 87 of the things that are going on. If you've got new team members to onboard or team members that are going to offboard, and we were just talking about this earlier, there's no good time in IT to take a vacation, And so like
or
that
training class, right?
At least that gives you windows, right? At least you have windows where you're like, okay, I know, that once this is done, I'm going to have a little bit of breathing space for that next thing. And maybe that's a good opportunity for me to take a break.
That's an important part of understanding the scope and having the closure is
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean, because most people, in my experience, is with, working with more, senior folks and, project managers, analysts, engineers, those kinds of things, where they say, hey, really, I'm going to take a vacation. I said, okay, look, I mean, you're responsible for your project. So you need to make sure that things are covered, or that you're taking a break in a logical time, like it's a good time, like optimize. I said, if you have to, obviously there's a family emergency, like just go. Everything's more important than this. Like that's what we're talking about. But be responsible for those things. If you have the proper milestones and the measurements, the scope of that is under control, you're better able to go and fit those other life things in and do it in a responsible way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I just think it gives you more opportunities. It gives you more opportunities to do the things that need to happen in between one thing ending and another thing beginning.
So for organizations that are like, okay, we're in that hot mess. I mean, I use the example of how we started down the path of correcting that behavior, and had fantastic reviews from the leadership team around doing that. It happened with that client. It happened at Hewlett Packard. It happened with Microsoft, with these other ISVs that I've worked for. I've done it several times. I know you've done the same thing, because we've had those conversations talking about this. People love the 15-minute stand up every morning.
Yeah, they love it.
They love
so
it.
Much.
Love it so much.
Yeah. Everybody's just trying to do it.
Yeah. But so talking about strategies for overcoming this cultural gap of not recognizing when it's time to close things, recognize the ceremony around that, the celebration. Like, how do you start to overcome that? What's your approach?
Well, I mean, much like you talked about the stand-up, and once again, I'm not telling you have to follow an Agile methodology to do this, but I do really appreciate and respect the fact that the Agile methodology does have defined ceremonies and defined processes, because sometimes, we're like, we pick and choose, right? We take the things we think we need to have and we toss out the stuff that we don't think is important. And often just simply adding, you can call it a ceremony, you can call it whatever you want, but adding that closure meeting or closure recognition or closure, timeline to your project as a thing that's going to happen, as an activity that's going to happen, can make a huge difference. And I'm a big fan of always doing a project kickoff and a project closeout, right? No matter what. Like, I'm not saying we don't do other things, but, I think if you do a project kickoff and a project closeout, you are defining this is the beginning and this is the end. Yeah. And that way we all agree, if anything else needs to happen, like, we're not gonna do the kickoff till we're ready to start, and we're not gonna do the closeout till we're ready to finish. When we're all ready to finish, we schedule the closeout. We all, celebrate that together, and then we all are able to wrap that project up and then decide if we want to do something else. But I think it's important to have that activity on your timeline and scheduled, to be able to make sure it happens.
And invite the stakeholders to that as well. I mean, look, if it's a well-governed process, then there shouldn't be any surprises there. You don't leave it to the end to say, oh, now we've delivered all these things. No, all along the way at each of those milestones, you're doing the mini celebrations of that, recognizing that, but you're also communicating that with the various stakeholders. They're providing feedback. So it gets to the end and it will go back through. This was the scope. This is what we did. What did we learn? Again, that's why I like the post-mortem label on that versus project closing. It is to look at what are the stats on this. We thought it would take 6 weeks. It took 6 months. Here's what happened because of that. Like, this couldn't be avoided. We had these delays. We had these problems. The other stuff that happens. How can we improve our process? How can we improve our scoping mechanisms so that we don't repeat these mistakes? And then, I mean, I like that. Again, it's the very Deming-esque.
Just do it. Just do it.
No, it's to optimize. Go back. What can we change? How can we improve on that? It's healthy to do that, especially within a long project, multiple times along the way. So correcting behaviors. But having checklists, having these formal stages, the launch and the closing, doing stakeholder surveys, getting additional feedback. It's funny that no matter how many different ways that you provide people that are named and anonymous, different methods of providing feedback, is that you can get all the way through a project and deliver it, and then suddenly get a bunch of, well, I never had these questions asked. It's like, well, you've been in half of the weekly calls and you've never brought any of this up. How do you expect us to do this and answer that? Like, we could have corrected it. We're done now with this. Is there something we could go back? Like, yeah, do you want to fund that?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Like, this is why, like, I would say again and again and again, it's like, if you don't speak up, that will assume that you are in agreement.
Yep. Silence equals agreement. So yeah, we
Yep.
talk a lot about speaking up in general. It's just, making sure your voice is heard, making sure, and if you're offering opportunities for feedback, then it's a matter of also encouraging people to use those opportunities for feedback as well.
And having different methods of feedback. Like if you're doing a giant, almost like a town hall with the stakeholders and different people that are impacted and everybody that's involved, they may not likely bring things up, but then in your next with your direct employees, the one-on-ones, they'll talk about it. Hey, you rolled this was done. You're started on, you've already, underway with this other new project. What are your thoughts on how it went? What could we have done? Who was difficult? Do we have to go put together for our team like our haters list of people that we want to avoid? We don't want to do internal projects from. Like, I'm not saying I ever had that kind of list, because honestly, I didn't need to write it down. We just knew.
Well, and I think another big thing, and we've kind of like tickled on this along the way. We've brought it up, but I think it's really important to celebrate your wins, right? And whenever you work on a project, I don't care if it's small or medium or large, you've put effort into it. And I think, it's a little bit of a lost art, is celebrating at the end. And I do think when you close something out, no matter how you think celebrating it makes sense, I do think it's good to celebrate it, because what ends up happening otherwise is you're just a cog, right? And we want to be more than a cog. We want to be individuals that are accomplishing something that matters. And from the human dynamics perspective, I think so many places, they just get done with one and they're on to the next. And, they don't even recognize that you did accomplish something. And so I think I'm going to add to the best practices list that I really think it's important to celebrate that.
I think that's huge. That's also then those same leaders want to understand, why is our turnover rate like every 18 to 24 months? You're burning through people because you don't recognize them for these things. There's some, like most of us, we're not afraid of hard work to go in there and put the long hours in. But if we don't feel like we're viewed, that we're valued, that we're seen, it can be difficult to maintain that.
Yeah, we want something to show for it. And it doesn't have to be tangible, but it does need to be meaningful. And so I think that, as a best practice for project closeout, not only, don't just have a meeting, do something, even if it's virtual, just do something for people to know that, like you said, they are valued and that they did something right.
I mean, Sharon, would you take, I know you're running a company, so the answer is just going to be no, but would you take a job like that with a 20% pay cut if it was, the culture was really strong and with good manager and it had all the structure and process? Would you take that over a 20% raise elsewhere where you knew none of those components would be there?
I mean, I think based on a lifetime of experience in this industry, absolutely, I would definitely prioritize culture, flexibility, and, meaningful work and appreciation far more than I would appreciate, just making cash.
Yeah.
100%.
I think some other best practices too, since we are both, we're in the knowledge management, information management space as well, is, and this helps with the knowledge transfer. If you have the clear documentation as part of your process, you're capturing formal sign-offs of, as we saw, with signatures or email confirmations that, yes, I agree, I accept that this is the place. I mean, if you go out to Fiverr and hire somebody for $20 to go and do a task for you, there's still built into the platform an acknowledgement to provide feedback, to accept, like, yes, I accept this.
Yep.
And so they put a timer on it, and it's like 5 days. If you don't respond, then it assumes you're happy with it and you're done, which is the right approach for that. But it gives you more than an opportunity to go in and leave your feedback, to say, no, it did not give me what I wanted out of that. And so best practices have a system like that, and then centralize all of that documentation as well, because being part of it, as I jokingly refer to as, CYA, cover your assets, cover yourself, protect yourself on there. But a big part of that is, not that I've ever had that experience where an executive comes back after the project is closed, is that I always asked for this. You never delivered that. Nope, not in the scope. Nope, it's nowhere in the documentation. We've got the breadcrumbs. Didn't happen.
Yeah.
So it's good protection for the employee as well as the stakeholders. Like, hey, you went and did something that I never authorized. Yeah, you said to go ahead and do it. Like, show me where I asked for you to go and do that. And now you need to go and fix that, because that was never part of it helps both directions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is why it's so important around your project plan and your artifacts and your documentation. The more you can templatize it, the more you can, keep it like really tight in terms of every time you do something, you learn more about exactly how to set that up the next time. The more you can templatize that and you're not starting from scratch, the more hopefully you won't miss things that most projects ask of you, because you don't get to the end and be like, oh yeah, we never did bake in a closeout, did we? Like if you use the template, it's going to be there every single time.
Yeah. Well, then just thinking to close this out, calls to action for this. Like if you're a project manager, you can go in, if the structure's not there, if the process is not there, you can apply it to your own project. Just because the organization is not as thoughtful about that project and structure. Like I've had PMs that worked for me that were just fantastic at this, and it helped shape and change the culture. Mm-hmm. And to go and adopt those good things, have a conversation with your manager about that. It's like, hey, we need to get more structure, more rigor into our process for that.
I'm sure we've probably both brought knowledge and templates from past places into future places and restructured things where I'm like, yeah, this isn't good enough. Let's redo this.
While I'm sure that I am emotionally draining on organizations, but yes, I have definitely brought a lot of that knowledge and shared that, because it's just, I want to bring what worked, what the best practice there, my experiences. If you're on a team that just finished a project, schedule, if you're in that position, discuss it and schedule a post-mortem, that project closeout.
Or pass to your project manager until they schedule one.
Yes. If you're a stakeholder or sponsor of a project, make sure that if nobody even asks, still give your feedback and official sign off that you acknowledge that. And there have been some great leaders that have done that. It wasn't asked for. They just reached out and said, hey, just want you to know, like, we're very happy with this. Like, it all got delivered. It was on time. Usually when there's praise there, they'll reach out and do that. Otherwise, if they're unhappy, they'll also let you know.
But that's just another reason, right? Like people look forward to those little things. And so, if you've got cool things at the end, then people are going to look forward to that.
But I like this idea of normalizing project closure practices. Yes. So each of the different pieces. And I know that there's a lot, jam-packed within these episodes, as always. So please be sure, if you've got other questions, follow up with us. You can follow us out on the socials, where we're not hiding. We're out there. You can go and find all the past episodes out on YouTube. Right now, they're primarily listed on my site on Buckley Planet. Some changes happening around there. We're going to be moving the episodes. I know we're going to talk about that next week. And then, of course, if you've not done so already, sign up for the free newsletter. We also have some news there that we're going to be going through next week. And there's a lot. And Sharon, I know that we're going to spill more of the details, but next week's going to be a little bit different of an episode. It'll be a lot shorter. And so, it will be, change is afoot.
It's okay. But everything's always about change. It's okay.
It is.
It's good. Change is good.
All right. Well, with that, we'll be back next Monday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, as we are every Monday, and we'll share the news of what's coming up next. And we're not going away or anything. There's a lot that's going to be happening, and we're actually expanding our world a bit. So we're going to talk about what's coming up. So
Yep.
Anyway, well, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.